I wanted to make a video on my view of hell. I think I've touched on this subject a little bit, but I want to kind of play out the practical implications of this view a little bit more in this video. I have increasingly seen in discussions regarding hell online or in various other capacities that Western image of a place where God himself sends people to suffer the torments and penalty for sin for all of eternity and potentially a literal fire, that dominates a lot of the popular thinking and the way in which people talk about hell, perceive hell, understand hell, as opposed to what I think is a much more biblical and really experiential version of hell, which suggests that hell is more a state of being than it is a place, right? And the reason that I say it's more a state of being than it is a place is, one, a lot of times people portray hell as being separation from God, and yet by that they do not mean that hell is a place where God is not, since God is omnipresent. He cannot not be somewhere where there is existence, right? God is in and moves in all things. And so we have this dilemma where we have to deal with the fact that hell is a place where God is, but it is also a place where people are separated from God. And I think the way we need to understand that is in relationship to our lives right now. This is what we perceive, this is what we see, this is what we understand, and our experience of life is moving towards a final telos. It's moving towards an end that has an expiration date. And so everything that we do now is anticipating, moving, progressing us, if you will, towards that end, whether that be hell or whether that be heaven. And so the question is heaven and hell something that begins after the final judgment, or is it something that begins now that we can begin to perceive and thus come to a better grasp of what these eternal realities will be? I think the answer is yes, we can start to understand both heaven and hell in the present as we watch the way in which lives move. St. Catherine of Siena has a wonderful quote where she says, "The whole way to heaven is heaven, because Jesus said, 'I am the way.'" I really like that. The whole path to heaven, the whole way to heaven is heaven, because Jesus said that he is the way. So the reality is, those of us who have been baptized into Christ, united with his church, and are regularly participating in the sacraments and living the Christian life, we are standing, in a real sense, in heaven. And the Holy Eucharist, when we receive that is heaven and earth coming together. Our prayer is, "Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven." And so the whole of our being is in a process of transfiguration from Adam, from the earthly, evil, sinful world in which we were born, into the heavenly glories that God has intended for his people. So this is the journey, and this begins for the Christian in baptism. Now, hell, on the other hand, is in some sense the state that we're born into, right? We're born into a place of alienation from God. We are not by nature united to Christ. We are not by nature lovers of righteousness. And so the trajectory of our life is bound for condemnation apart from Jesus Christ. And in a real sense, as we develop and as we grow, if we persist in obstinance towards God, in rebellion towards God, we place ourselves further and further in an anti-deification process. Just as the Christian saint, when we talk about saints, what are we talking about? We're ultimately talking about a person, just like you and me, who has been transfigured into glory, who has been transfigured, who has run the race, who has been glorified. And so when we talk about somebody in hell, it's an anti-saint. It's that inverted. It's an anti-deification that leads ultimately to somebody becoming the exact opposite of a saint. If the saint is glorified humanity, hell is the absence of humanity. It is the removal of the image of God, such that, as N.T. Wright says in his book, Surprised by Hope, I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially he says, those in hell will be something like a human being, or what once was a human being, but will be now creatures that are not just beyond hope, but also beyond pity. This is the way I think we need to understand hell, because all too often we think about heaven and hell as two eternal destinies that God determines for us based upon whether or not we've done good enough or whether or not we're liked enough. And again, I'm using a very pop-level approach, but this is the image. God puts people in hell to burn for eternity for their rejection, and they're screaming, going, man, if only I would have known, and oh Lord, pull me out of here, I hate it down here, I want to be with you now. And he's like, you had your chance and now it's too late. We need to get away from this thinking. We need to talk about the reality of hell more often. It's a very neglected subject in churches, which is, I think, a disservice to congregations, because of the fact that when we go out into the world as apologists, talking to a lost world, and they have this image of God that if you do the right things, you're rewarded with heaven. If you do the wrong things, you're punished with hell. They don't see that in a real sense, these realities are of our own making, right? And I don't want to say heaven's of our own making. That can be taken too far. But in a real sense, when we're brought into Christ by the grace of God, we cooperate with that grace throughout our lives, growing in our sanctification unto this end. Hell is a trajectory where it's basically us resisting the grace of God, pushing it away, becoming more and more obsessed with deifying ourselves through the world's means, whether that be sex, whether that be money, whether that be power, whatever it is, you start to resemble those things. As Christians, our goal, our triumph, is to become conformed to the image of Jesus Christ. And so as we move along the Christian life, hopefully we are all becoming more and more like Christ, such that on the last day we shall have been conformed to his image. The very opposite is true for those who are going to hell, who will be in hell. These are people who have conformed themselves to some idol, something other than God. And so as their life continues, they start to look more and more like these things, such that in the end, when they stand before the throne of God, they will bear the image of an idol. They will bear the image of a false god, a God who cannot save. And thus, you will have two groups of people standing in the same reality, which is in the presence of God. One group of people will be deified through Jesus Christ, able to withstand the holiness and love and goodness of God. And those who stand in sin, in wickedness, outside the ark of the church, and they will be in torment in the presence of the holiness of God, because the contrast between their rebellion and God's goodness and mercy and love and holiness will be so extreme that his presence will be torturous to them. This, I really believe, helps us to understand why our actions in the present matter so much. I think it really helps us to understand why the gospel being preached to a lost world matters so much, because when we look around with this perspective, we see people in hell. We see people that are more or less deified into the image of the devil. And we recognize more readily the problem, what's going on here. And so I think if we start to talk about hell this way, we will start to minister more fruitfully, and we will start to move away from both a false idea of what heaven and hell are and a false idea of who God is as it relates to these two realities. There's more that I could say, but that's for another video. I think I've said everything that I wanted to say. And so I hope this was helpful. If you agree, write comments below. If you disagree, if you want to add some nuance, feel free to do that as well. I enjoy hearing from you guys, and I'll talk to you guys next time.